counting my gratitudes. So welcome to you all tonight. Thank you for joining us. We've had a great turnout so far as I can see on Zoom, which is fantastic. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Sarah Smith. She is a family physician based in Alberta. She has an active patient panel of about 1,300 patients. I'm going to let Sarah herself tell you a little bit more about what she does and what makes her tick and gets her excited. But overall about Sarah, she is married to a husband of 21 years and they have 2 sons and live on a small farm together. She enjoys things that include farming, exploring, reading, and obviously coaching. So with that, I'm going to leave it to Sarah. Thank you very much for being here to everyone. And just a reminder that the segment is recorded. So if you love the session tonight, feel free to let your other division members know so they can check it out on their own time. And that's all. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Smith.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. Hopefully you're somewhere comfortable and we'll be going over a big broad overview of how we can stop chatting at night. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen, which will take me a moment to gather you all back. So I'm going to be using the chat box as well. So if you are able to use the chat box, I know some of you on the phone may not be, and that's okay. But if you are on a screen where you can, that's perfect. All right, so I'm Sarah Smith. I am a rural family physician currently in Edson, Alberta, and I'm originally from Australia. And as part of my journey in family medicine, I was having significant difficulty getting home with my charting and paperwork done. In fact, it was interfering with family time, weekends, evenings, sleep, and all of the things that we're going to learn about tonight, which I'm sure is going to be the same for your experience too, if you're having the same difficulties as well. So as part of me figuring out how to get home with my charting and paperwork done, I went off and became a life coach, which is what we're going to be learning about tonight. So I specialized in the area of helping my fellow family physicians and then other physicians and now nurse practitioners, psychologists, podiatrists, like a whole lot of the spectrum of people who are also charting and documenting their clinical encounters. So the objectives of tonight is the true cost of charting at night and how to stop charting at night. So I want to tell you a story about Samantha to start with. So Samantha is a family physician, and when I first met Samantha, she was months behind in her charting, and she had this habit of putting off billing until her charting was done. So she was also months behind in her billing as well. In fact, she hadn't had a reliable income in months. She was a physician, and in her case, she was a family physician. She was a mom, she was a business owner, and she was feeling very tired, very overwhelmed, and had, as I said, that unreliable income. So about 10 to 30% of her charts were complete by the end of the clinical day, which meant that tonight she's got to finish them off, or the weekend, and that backlog was getting heavier and heavier, especially when it was starting to impact her family's income. So with the tools that we're learning tonight, she has been able to close her backlog, get that reliable income, closing her chart same day, and having that extra time for family and sleep and weekends. So when we look at life coaching, when we look at executive coaching in engineers, they have been getting executive coaching for years, but physicians really haven't moved into this space of having coaches until recently, and you're starting to see it in the literature. So this is an article from August 2019, and it was looking at, can professional coaching help physician well-being, distress? So they did a study on it, and they put 88 physicians through a program with non-physician coaches, which means coaches who are not originally physicians and became coaches, but these are executive coaches. And they found that the coaching did help reduce emotional exhaustion, improved quality of life in physicians, which is pretty interesting that you can improve the quality of life of physicians. Resiliency scores improved and overall burnout decreased. And when you dig into the paper, you'll find out that they only got 3.5 hours of coaching in those 6 months of the study. So it wasn't a huge investment in time to get massive statistical significance in their feeling of well-being and other measured outcomes. All right, so let's hear from you in the chat box. If you are leaving the office with unfinished charts and inboxes. Now, do this if you feel safe to do so. There's no have to about the chat box. It just is much more interesting if you're interactive, that's all. If you are charting at night or if you're charting on weekends, so that we have an idea of who's here and what's happening for them. Usually charting done by the end of the day, says Melissa. Awesome. Guilty, says Jan. And I know that tonight we have physicians and nurse practitioners and some other specialty physicians, and you are all welcome here. And of the tools that we're learning tonight, hopefully you'll find some very helpful ideas of how to get started with change. Yes, at night and weekends, says Sheila. Less so since you've increased your appointment length times, says Danielle, but with the cost of reduced income, very important to recognize that. Okay, and depending how the office day goes, that's a very interesting comment right there. So it's being abdicated to something else in your day. So interesting, right? Okay. Do you want to see patients and get home with today's work done? Today's charts closed, no backlog, and time for a life outside of your clinical day. Oh, Petra. Okay, got it. Finish charts, but tasks and inbox depends. Yeah, for sure. Okay. All right. So if you are ready to get home with today's work done and today's charts closed, I want to first know what's stopping you getting home with today's work done. So we've heard some of that, that the appointments were too short, that we had, depends on how the office day goes. What else? What else gets in the way of getting those charts closed or getting those inboxes empty? What do you find about your clinical day? Extra paperwork. Yep. Patients arriving late and squish ins. My brain's not working by the end of the day. Good one. An overwhelming amount of paperwork and tasks that come in every day. I'm tired. I'm not managing the appointment well. Fatigued. Notes are too long. I'm seeing patients in their homes and must chart later. Interesting, Jessica. Okay. So this is going to apply to you even when you're moving location. So while you're thinking of your answers, I'm going to just go through some of the common ones here as well. It's not a fun kind of work. I love that answer. It's not the fun part, right? Too many patients, unfinished chats, emotionally exhausted. Yeah. Interruptions. I don't think I've heard that one from many of you. Or the uninterrupted task could be one of the interruptions there. Yeah. Patients are late. I heard that one. Learners. No one's mentioned learners yet. Lunch meetings. The EMR is complicated. That might apply to some of you. Patients don't like it when I chat in the rooms. There's consultation calls to make and take when you're on call. Complex patients. Due diligence around opioid prescriptions and other controlled meds. So yeah, ticking off all those boxes. So we have the same here in Alberta where there's 13 must-do items for every opioid prescription. So much fun. Okay, and after all of that, and the inboxes and charts are not done, how are you feeling? So what are some of the common feelings that you're having within a clinical environment? And I must say, I have been super excited to talk to you guys in Nanaimo because I had an experience a few years ago where one of my patients was coming to Nanaimo and she was having a hard time finding a family doc. And I'm like, I would love to help the Nanaimo physicians. So here I am helping you all. So I'm super excited about that. Defeated. I'm bringing stress home to my family. I'm hangry, resentful, and petulant, burnt out, second guessing community medicine. Yes, right? It's it's hard to have a sustainable career when you're having these emotions. Dread, overwhelm, exhausted, frustrated. They're common ones that I hear. You guys came up with some good words. Resentful and vigilant. Okay, so you may have had or said some of these sentences. So you may have had some of these sentences in your head, or you may have said them out loud to your family or to your colleagues or to your loved ones. Where do I even start? I used to have these sentences in my head as well. The work is never done. I'm always thinking about my charts and inboxes. I dread work. I hate paperwork. I'm so overwhelmed. I just sit and look at it, and what's wrong with me? All right. So maybe some of you have had some of those in your head. Okay, so what then is the true cost of doing that chatting and inboxes on the evenings and on the weekends? It is the mental load. So taking home some forms, I would take home forms on a Saturday. Well, on a Friday night, I would take home forms. And it wasn't many, it was maybe 3 or 5 forms that would come home. And I would defer fun because I had paperwork. It's like, hey, we should go to Jasper this weekend. And I'm like, no, I have paperwork. And now when I say I had paperwork, the laundry would be done, the kitchen would be clean, some of the countertops, some of the closets, all of that would be done. So I could put off doing this thing that felt like it was sucking my life away. Okay, the form, 3 forms. Now, when I actually eventually sat down to do them, and it may not have been before I went back to work on Monday, these things would haunt me for weeks. When I actually sat down to do them, it wasn't as much work as I had expected it to be in my brain. And the number of hours that I had been thinking about these forms was exponential compared to the amount of work that was actually required. So when you get paid 30, 50, 100, 200 bucks for a form, it didn't account for the amount of think time that had gone into this, let alone the putting off life because I had paperwork. You may not have got this bad, but I certainly did. So I'm under earning. So somebody here's already thought about, if I drop my patient numbers down to 3 an hour or even 2 an hour, maybe I'll keep up. And even then you're noticing I'm still not keeping up. What's gone wrong? Because now I'm also under earning. Or that putting off billing till my charting's done. So I'm now under earning because I might be missing deadlines to get this billing in before that nominated day of can't submit after this date. And then most important is that reduced time for rest and family and your life outside of medicine. Okay, this becomes unsustainable. I hear physicians say this over and over. It's unsustainable if I don't have time for the rest of my life, if this is just this all-consuming career. Okay, so let's remind you, after that horrible story, I'm sorry, that you are amongst friends and that you are not alone in this journey. So have a think about your week and tell me, how many hours are you spending doing your charting inboxes after the last patient leaves? So you can decide to calculate this however you want. It could be the number of hours you're spending at the clinic. It could be the number of hours you're spending in the evening, anything outside of the patient encounter, however you want to calculate it. Go ahead and kind of put some numbers to it for me and pop that in the chat box. Okay, approximately 10, 2 to 3, 6 to 10. An extra day of work in total. Yeah, that's pretty common. 10, 2 hours a day. Oh, you figured out how to change your name, Petra. Perfect. All right. So on average, it's about 6 hours a week. For every hour of patient visits, there's 15 minutes of charting to do at the end of the day. Yeah. And then, Jan, we have to think about the inboxes too, because that's part of today's work. So if it was just 6 hours a week, that would be 360 hours a year. Have a think about what you'd rather be doing with 360 hours a year or 6 hours a week. As your brain kind of marinates in that question, because I'm going to come back to that, I'm going to ask you what you would actually do with that time. Okay, because that's really important. But it's just nice to know you're not alone, because there's other physicians here who are also doing this. All right, so how do we do it? What are the actual steps to getting you home with today's work done? So this is the process I have taken hundreds of physicians and now adding nurse practitioners and psychologists to the mix. So I have 2 separate programs that walk them through these actual steps. Okay, we're going to go through them. I'm going to give you them all. And we're going to go through each one separately, and then we're going to have time for questions. So step one, the foundational step, is completing our charting after every patient. I say that, and sometimes your brain explodes a little with, oh my goodness, that's not going to be possible for me. Step 2 is evaluating our clinical encounters. So the time in the room with the patient. Yeah, Laura just laughed. Perfect. She's like, that's impossible. Not happening. Laugh out loud. Perfect. Having an exact plan for our inboxes, because as I said to you, today's work is not just the patients and the charts. It's also the inboxes, the messages, the questions, the consults, the forms, all the other things that come into our clinical days, and then managing our interruptions. So these are our 4 steps. So let's dive in. Okay, completing our charting after every patient, Laura, even when there are 3 patients waiting in your waiting room. Even when we're 20 minutes behind, or 30 minutes behind, or 50 minutes behind. Even when there's now 50 things in your inbox, or 100, or 200, even when. Okay. How on earth is that possible? So one of the physicians that I was coaching, she actually wrote down, bless her heart, all of the reasons why this wouldn't work. She came up with 139 precisely why this wouldn't work. Now, on the good side of this story, she was closing her charts after every patient within days. So she actually figured it out pretty dang fast. But when she actually sat down to figure out this is impossible, I can't believe you're asking me to do this, she wrote them all down. So how on earth do we get started with this? So the reason I give you these questions is to help your brain be resourceful for the answer, because all of you work in different environments. So one of you is seeing patients in the home and then leaving. Others are seeing them in the clinic. Some of you may be seeing patients in the hospital. Some of you might be seeing patients in a hospital outpatient setting. Some of you have electronic EMRs, some of you don't. So that is why I give you these tools to get started with. So how do we make this possible? If we had the goal of seeing patients and closing charts, we're going to ask these questions to help us in that journey to get there. We ask, what is in your note and why? One of you mentioned, I chart too much. So that is something that you have decided about your charting. And we're not saying don't chart, and we're not saying that you need to cut corners with your charting, but you know what belongs in a note. You know, your executive decision makers of your clinical day. You need to record what happened. What was the story? What was the clinical assessment? What does your clinical reasoning look like? What is your assessment and plan? And what else? What else is in your notes and why? And being super curious with all of the things that you put in a note. What is your brain telling you is more important than the note? And if you're not sure the answer to this, leave the room, sit down at the computer to do the charting and see what comes up for you. So if you were to do that process right now, what would you expect stops you getting that chart done right now? What is your biggest obstacles? You can take a moment and write that in the chat if you like. Pressure to move to the next patient. See, you're not alone. Like every single physician has that thought. Patients waiting. Okay, even if I'm behind. People in the waiting room. Okay. So these are your big obstacles and you're not alone. Physicians feel this pressure to see the next patient. And you are going to learn, we're going to go through this in a moment, why it's important even when there's a patient in the waiting room and a patient in the next room. I hate being late for lunch. I'm hangry. Okay, that's important to know. So how could you start to look after yourself? So when you go back to the desk, there's nothing that says you can't put something in your mouth while you're doing that chart note. Okay. Could you look after yourself along the way if you knew that you're human and you need water and sustenance to keep going? Other people like colleagues, staff, and learners, interesting. So you're getting interrupted. So as we get to there, Petra, you'll figure that out as well. Charting is boring. Yes, it's boring, but how much more exciting is it tonight at 9 p.m.? I dictate, yet to figure out how to eat and talk. Okay, interesting. So we need very short, quick snacks for you. And patients hate waiting. Okay, good, good. We've got some great answers there. How and where could you get that note done if you wanted to? So in my case, I was done with doing this later. I'm like, I have to figure this out. I'm going to have to leave medicine. And I kind of like my patients and I'm great at medicine and I hate the job. Okay. So I had decided if I can't figure this out, I'm going to have to, I had no idea what else I could do, right? None, zero. I had one skill set and that was being a doctor. How and where could you get that note done if you had decided, I am not doing this later. I'm done with later. I want this result right now. Okay, or soon. But you decided, nope, I've had enough. How and where could you get that note done if you wanted to? All right, and what stops you? So you come up with some good ones in the chat box there. Okay, these are, we can call them obstacles. You can call them deterrents, whatever you like to call them. I call them obstacles. As you come up with an obstacle, like I'm hungry, what is your most simple solution? Yours, not necessarily mine. And other physicians might come up with some other ideas that are helpful to you, but what is going to be most simple for you to get around this obstacle? Because every obstacle you come across, if you can figure out a way around it or over it, or your solution to it, you are going to get to where you're going. Sometimes I eat between consults. Look at you go, looking after yourself. Love it. Okay. Clinical encounters. So this is your time in the room with the patient. Okay. So I'm going to let you in on a secret. You guys are the executive decision makers in the room. What does that mean? It means you're the boss. Okay. Not your patients, you. You're the one who's actually taking this information and coming up with an idea of what's going on and giving that expert opinion and giving your recommendations to a patient, helping your patients take up the task of doing the things to keep them healthy. Okay. You guys are very important. So inside the clinical encounter, we need to think about all of the minutes and seconds in the room because they all count. You all told me you hate it when patients are waiting, which kind of tells me you want to run on time. The other fun thing about BC is you don't get paid extra if you see them for 40 minutes in a 10-minute consult. So it's to your financial advantage to keep the appointment to the appointment length. Now, we are not talking about one patient, one problem. You are the decision makers in the room. If you want to see 5 things in the room, go for it. You're the boss, okay? But be onto yourself. Evaluate the minutes and seconds in the room. They all matter because they're all compounding. You're like, I hate being 15 minutes behind, but you started 8 minutes late. Okay. And then you want to put that on you. I'm running 15 minutes behind. No, maybe it wasn't you. Maybe your patient got roomed 8 minutes late. Okay. Maybe somebody was talking to you in the corridor for 8 minutes. Be onto it. Start looking at all the minutes and seconds of your clinical days. Make decisions with now and later in mind. So, my favorite forms, you see a patient, you're wrapping up, and they hand you a form. Or you see a patient, you've got your hand on the doorknob to say goodbye, and they say, oh, by the way. Making decisions with now and later in mind means you listen to the request of your time and you decide, do I need to see this now? And if I do, what is the consequence to my day? Okay, now and later in mind. Now, sometimes you're going to say yes and take the hit to your day. And sometimes you're going to say no. And you're going to figure out how we're going to say that to the patient to look after now and later. Okay. So I say, when you're the boss, you've got these big decisions to make. And evaluating all the reasons that contribute to you running on time or behind so that you can start to run on time. So sometimes we just go years and years without even noticing what's happening in our clinical day or thinking we have no control over our clinical day. But you'll start to, when we sit back and think about it, or when we start to pay attention, you're like, hey, I'm always half an hour behind at 11 o'clock. I wonder why, right? And as you ask those questions.
There's a workshop on like how to stop charting.
Rushi, we can hear you. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. So when you start to be interested in why am I half an hour behind at 11, what happens? It's interesting that it's often the same things happening over and over, day after day. And as you're onto yourself, you can start to figure out what process got me here and what could I be doing differently. All right. So that is what I mean. That is like an introduction to how we can start to lead that clinical encounter so you can take back some of that control in the room or start to be in a little bit better control of the actual time, that type of thing. Oh, no problem at all. It's all good. We got you. All right. Exact plan for inboxes, work lists, and forms. So as I said, as family docs, you and all the other people here, inboxes, work lists, and forms are part of today's work. They are not random things that happen to you. My energy levels dip around 2 or 3 p.m. I'm slower in decision making. You are jumping the gun. We are doing that next. But yes, absolutely. So you're noticing I need a tea break at 2 or 3 p.m. Now that's important. You're human with human physiology. It needs water and it needs a break. Notice that and start to plan for that, whatever that plan will look like for you. But you're human. And as physicians, we often want to be superhuman. Like, I don't need to pee or drink. It's not true. You're making high level decisions and some lesser high level decisions, but a lot of high level decisions. Okay. So if you need water and you need food, notice that and be nice to yourself. So important. Okay. Structured priority for work lists. I told you this work is part of today's work. Okay. So if it's part of today's work, how long do you need for today's work? Have you figured it out? Do you know? What makes sense for your clinical day? So the example I like to give is in my world, in the morning, if a prescription comes in and I don't attend to that by lunchtime I have a reminder. So now I have 2 things in my inbox for the same patient. That's now compounding seconds because I have to click, click, click to get rid of it. Okay, so not only am I doing the prescription, I'm also getting rid of an additional not needed task. So for me, the priority is I need to get to that bit of my day before the lunch hour. You might notice when staff go home at 4:30, and now you're doing a whole lot of phone calls that could have been handled by the day staff. But because you didn't get to it till 4:30, now you're doing all the work. Interesting. So starting to be curious about what makes sense for my clinical day, and then carving out protected time. So I told you to see patients and close charts was step one. Now, when you sat down at your desk and there was that blinky thing in the corner that said you now have 50 new messages, and you opened it and you looked at the first one and it said, yeah, that's a long consult note. I don't have time for that right now. And you close it. So you open the next one and you're like, I don't have time to do that right now. You close it. We are not doing work efficiently. We are doing work twice. And some things we've been doing for weeks because we've looked at it at least a dozen times, things sitting in our inboxes. So we need the time to be able to open it and action it, open it and action it. That is going to be protected time. Now, that might be where you work, opportunity to start to be curious about your clinical day and what would make sense for you with your staffing, with your EMR, with your patients, with your requests in your inbox, of what that would look like for you. And some of you have very concrete, you don't have control over how many patients, what time they're booked in. So now we're being curious about, well, when is this work going to get done? So some of you said you're like brain dead by the end of the day, decision fatigue, all the things. So leaving it all to the end of the day doesn't make sense for you. If you're like, my brain is done, I'd rather just be leaving after the last patient. Take notice of that. Take notice that you want to be done after the last patient. So then we need to find other times of the day. At building strategies for the results that slow you down. Anything that's been kicking around in your inbox for a few weeks, it's because you don't know what to do with it. Whether it's you need to learn about that condition, you need to ask a friend, or you have no way of figuring out how to get this patient back for this type of result, or how to set up a safety net. Those are slowing you down. So as you build systems and processes that might be with your primary care network or with the division or other people around you that can help within your team, then your inboxes get faster and faster. Yay. We're not doing as much inbox work because we don't like it. It's boring. All right, managing our interruptions. So interruptions contribute to decision fatigue. So who else has decision fatigue as they go through their day, and what time of day do you notice it? I'll give you a minute. Okay, you're all thinking. So you're making thousands of decisions daily, and you've been at work all day, so I can't expect you to make another one. That's just rude. So having end of the day, by the time the kids get out the door to school, right first thing in the morning, you're already like, I'm done. Much worse in the afternoon, much slower. Yeah. Difficulty understanding what the patient's even saying. I love that you notice that about your day, right? So you've been in there mashing things into your head all day, and then you're in a consultation, you're at least 15 minutes behind because you told me how stressful that is. And you go to do the pap smear and the light fails, and you actually need a new globe for it. Deep breath. You leave the room to go find the pap smear globe for the pap smear light, and there's at least one person outside the door. And they say, Mr. Jones is on the phone. He's wondering if that form is done yet. Your favorite question too. How did they know? So your brain immediately says, well, Mrs. Jones is up on the bed. She's really uncomfortable. I'm 15 minutes behind. I have no idea if I've done that form for Mr. Jones or not. I have no idea if I'm going to be able to do it today. And you're like just put it on my desk. I just put the question on my desk and you go off to look for the pap smear light. All right. So you're already making thousands of decisions daily. And each time you're interrupted, you're making 5 more before you even answer the question. So we need to start to think about batching even some of your decisions. Even if you can't control others and your team, batching some of your decisions. So every time you get back to your office and you open up the work list, you're doing those 5 questions over and over again. So every time we task switch, 5 more decisions. So you can see how it quickly adds up that you are done. So when we're starting to take opportunities like this, where you're not in the clinical environment, you're just thinking about it. It's that focused time to think about your clinical day, to start taking notice of your clinical day. Start noticing the busyness, what happens, who's interrupting me and why. What do they always ask me? What is always the answer? How could I start to interrupt that? Empowering our teams, perhaps, could be part of it. It will be dependent for you in your clinical space, but it's valuable work. Okay. All right. I told you we would come back to why we can leave a patient waiting in the next room. So tell me, what would be different about your clinical day if you walk into patient number 6 for the day and all of the charting is done for the day? So the charts are done, the billing's done, the referral letters are done, the MRI request, mammogram request, diabetes requisition, all done for every patient, and you're walking into patient number 6. What's different about that encounter? Feel light, clear-headed. Okay, so that's different then than your first answer, which was I'm much slower and I don't understand what my patient's even saying. Ready to engage with this patient? Yes. Not having to carry all those details in my memory. Relaxed and cheerful and more social. Be careful of the social, because that's going to add those compounding minutes and seconds to your day. But other than that, I love it. Less dread. Yes. There'll be some dread though. So Trish, just be aware when there's a patient in the room, your brain's like, oh, some of the time. Don't worry, that is also normal. To have that like, oh, I've got to do another one, but less is better. Yes, it is. Less is way better. Okay, so more focused, less stress and fatigue, energized, in control, and enjoying your career again, perhaps. Okay, would feel good. Also, if the day ran on time. So here's the thing, Laura. So I have a program for physicians. And I have a program for nurse practitioners as well. But inside the program, we just did a whole month dedicated to running on time. Because remember, I told you to evaluate all of the minutes and seconds. And then we did a second month looking at the particularly spotlighting the interruptions. So don't have that expectation of yourself that you're going to run on time tomorrow. Like, give yourself grace to figure out all of the minutes and seconds about running on time. Okay. So this is with that we had a challenge, a run on time challenge, so we could really dive into what is interrupting our day. Why aren't we running on time? What are we saying yes to that we should have said no to or deferred or had another plan of action for, and then had to practice it. So keep that in mind. All right. So if you are walking into patient number 6 and everything behind you is done, that patient is getting your highest brain. Okay, your highest brain, the clinical decision maker, executive decision maker, boss brain. It's so much easier to do our higher level work when we don't have a million things mashed into our head. Okay, So we are not doing it just for you. This is not selfish. It's also for your patients. Isn't that fun? What would be different about your evenings if your charting was closed? All your charts are done and you're leaving. Well, let's add in the inboxes too, and all the inboxes are done too. And you're leaving the office. What's different about your evenings then? The evening meeting. Woo! Sorry. That's me tonight. I'm interrupting your wonderful evening of no work. Now I feel bad. Freedom. Okay. And kitty bedtime. And it's being recorded, so you could have always watched it later anyway. Christy. A happy husband. Ooh, that sounds fun. All right. Okay. So more, this is worth it. Okay, good. Jane, I'm so pleased. All right. So more present at home. I've never been called out like that before, you know. You're taking up my evening. I'm like, yeah, I am actually taking up your evening. That's rude. Okay, more present at home, hobbies, exercise, and sleep. I think these, you're like, oh, yeah. You know, hobbies, whatever. Present at home. Yeah, I'm still present at home, even though I've got work to do. But your ability to rest and recuperate is part of building a sustainable clinical career. Okay. Happy husband, as in he doesn't have to listen to me rant about my day and all the work I have left to do. And not me, the group meetings and department meetings. Okay, we're good then. Perfect. So I value you, okay, in Nanaimo, where it's years for any of my patients who are locating over to Nanaimo to get a family doctor. So I love you guys. I worry about you guys because you are doing amazing work and you're holding it together, as in the system of healthcare, but you need your rest and you need your off time and you need to be able to exercise as part of humanness. And it's lovely to be able to connect with our families, with our people. Okay, so important to look after you. All right. I am now the mum who can help with homeschooling, baking, and reading stories about dragons. It's my admin day. I have nothing to do. Inbox is empty, charts and backlog done. I'm sitting drinking tea thinking I must be forgetting something. So when you first figure this out, it is not comfortable. It's weird. It's weird to get home and sit on the couch and enjoy Netflix and go, I must be forgetting something. Completely normal. Completely normal. Okay, so how do we do this? I want you to start to imagine. So if we were to think about all the things we've learned tonight, your charting, consultations, forms, inboxes, backlog, what would you love to create? What would be, if we could wave a magic wand, perfect world, what would you desire? Okay, it's really important to ask your brain this. What would you love? What would be awesome? It would be awesome if what? How would you complete that sentence? If you were thinking about your clinical day or your charting or your inboxes, what would you love to create and why? Give you a minute for your imagination. We're pretty close to done, and then I'll be able to answer any questions. I think this is my second to last slide. If you don't understand the question, ask me to say it again in a different way. If I could chart and get paid for it. Okay, but Melissa, if you were seeing patients and the chart was done within the appointment time, then you're getting paid for the work. Okay, so we're not saying see patients and then close charts tonight when you're not going to get paid for it. We're saying no, see patients and close charts at the same time. It's so much more fun. Okay, cool, perfect. So your desire is, I want to get paid for the work I'm doing. That's awesome. That would be an awesome thing to think. Okay. All right. So it's a little overwhelming when I give you like, whoosh, that input into your brain. I have to search through every online EMR to link lab results, etc. Yeah, so there's that flow process, and you're going to say that is kind of slowing me down. Is there any faster way to do this? Is there a different person who could help me in my clinic? Anything like that. Perhaps a minion to write what I'm saying to the patient, get my exam bed ready and lab requisition while I talk. Yep. But then if you're like, I like the fact that lab requisitions are sometimes pre-ordered or organized, that would help me save myself some time. That would be important to recognize. So like I was saying, there's a lot of information we've gone through tonight. Think about just one thing you've learned today and start doing that. Don't let yourself be overwhelmed with, oh my goodness, I could never do all of that. Just choose one thing and do that one thing. If we are committed to achieving results, failing, normal. Succeeding, fun. Failing, normal. Succeeding, fun. But quitting won't get you there. And wishing for it doesn't get you there either. So think about sitting on the couch and wishing you could run a 140-kilometer marathon. It takes zero effort, right? None of the hard work. And you've got possibly zero interest in doing it. But if you did decide to do that, you would expect that on day one, you couldn't run 140 kilometers, right? And you wouldn't make it mean I'm stupid. You would say, I haven't trained enough. I haven't tried enough things. I haven't gone out and done the work to get there. So when day one, you fail at running 140 kilometers, you're like, yeah, of course I did. And you keep moving on towards that goal. You just don't quit and you'll get there eventually, even if it takes you years. But if you don't do anything, you just stay where you are, sitting on the couch, wishing you could run 140 kilometers, or going to work each day, wishing you could go home and have no homework. But what if it's possible? And even if it's not 100% possible for you, even if it could be better than it is now, isn't that worth it to do? All right, so that I think is our last slide. I've just got the reference slide there of that article, and it's being recorded, so you can come back to that slide. So I'm going to stop so that you guys can ask me any questions. All right, hello. So if you need to unmute yourself and talk, you can. Hi, Petra. I know that one. Jessica, go ahead. Tell me what you're thinking.
Yeah, just wondering if you have any tips for home visits where you may not even have a computer and access to the chart. Should you do them in the car, dictate, like,
yeah. So
what do you do?
Yeah, you get to decide what is going to make sense for you. So for instance, can you take a laptop in with you and connect to the EMR? If not, can you write it down and get it scanned into the EMR later? Like, what would be possible for you?
Yeah, it just feels so wrong because I do mostly palliative home visits. So typing while someone's, telling me that they're, their biggest regrets, it feels really awful.
It feels icky and wrong because it's unfamiliar to you. But I work with my nurse practitioner, palliative care. She takes her laptop in. She doesn't make it mean I'm being rude. She makes it mean this is part of my looking after you. Is being able to do the work I need to do to help make sure you've got all the things you need to do. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's very weird when you first start doing it. You're like, oh, is it okay? Am I okay? Is this okay? That's all normal. It's all normal. And those of you who are going to start to do things in the room differently, you're like, am I okay? Is it okay? Are my patients okay? Is the relationship with my patients okay? And you let it be okay. You're like, yes, I'm learning a new way of doing this for you, for both of us. Or you decide, I don't want to do it ever in the house, but I'm going to figure out how to do it before I move on to the next patient. You get to decide that too. This is your way, not my way. Okay. Anyone else have a question? You can go ahead and unmute yourself. Hey, Petra, come on.
Just for the people that you work with what's a commonly successful first step towards being able to get those charts done? Is it the watching the minutes and seconds and figuring out where you're losing time, or is it finishing the note before you move on to the next patient? What would you say is the best bang for your buck?
Great question. I'm going to say it will be somewhat individual for people, but start noticing, what is my note look like at the end of the consultation right now? And if I do the note right now, how long does it take me? Just kind of have an experiment with yourself a little bit, and then take the first step. You're like, I'm going to see what happens if I come out of the room and just kind of have my blinkers on and dump my brain and see what happens. Because some of you may have that really long encounter where if you just start doing that tomorrow, it's going to be really intrusive. So you may need to measure, do some measurements first. You're like, okay, my charting from this type of encounter takes me 10 minutes. So clearly I now have to modify my encounter a little bit, or my documentation a lot, and to figure out how can I get the whole thing to be contained within the time I'm allowed. Is that helpful? Yeah, okay. Sometimes I tell patients I can listen to them and chart and print requests, and I can multitask because I'm a woman. Yeah, so you can. So sometimes your patients will be like, what are you doing? And you'll make that mean, oh, I shouldn't be doing it. But actually they were just curious. What are you doing? You're like, I'm charting it. I'm writing it down so I don't forget. And they're like, oh. So when you think about going to the lawyer or an accountant, and you're with them for an hour in the room and they write nothing down, do you trust them more or less at the end of that encounter? Okay. So knowing that, we now have these patients and we're seeing them and we're doing stuff for them, and then we're trying to remember it like days or weeks or months later. Okay, I use templates for some of my encounters, like opiate ones. Absolutely. Like I said, 13 must-dos for the college. I totally created a template for that for my physicians in my clinic, because I don't use templates for everything. Absolutely not. But for that one, I'm like, I'm not going to write out every single time, every single thing I did. That would take a lot of my hours. Gabrielle, what's going on?
Hi. So I had a question. In our clinic, we've worked so hard to create a culture of really valuing our staff and having really collegial communications and all of that. And then I find in those moments where I'm not seeing a patient and I look like I'm quiet in my office, I'm actually just absolutely brain powering through a task. And then they're right behind me. Oh, hey, la, 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 interruption. And I tend to just be nice and resentful deeply inside. So it's that challenge of how to turn that around in a way that works for both of us.
Yeah. So we're not going to have that conversation right there and then. You could, but it would be weird, kind of abrasive, because you're like, I'm usually just turn around and start talking to them, but no one, zero others, will respect your time. That's your job. Okay. No one else understands what you're doing or the amazing million things you have to do each day. So it's up to you to value your time. So it's going to be a conversation with those staff members that need to interrupt you about when that best time is for you. And you can also ask them what's best for them. So you can have this collegial discussion about, hey, I know you have questions to ask me, but I'm actually doing a really deep dive into my inbox right now. So, or at 12:30. So when can we meet to go through the things that you're going to have for me as well? Is that helpful? Because they might come back with some of their ideas on what will work for them as well. Yeah, great question. Managing learners. I was the interruption. Oh, Michelle. Don't think of yourself like the interruption. No, learners are very important. So I think, again, having that discussion with your learners about what's going to work best for your flow and their flow for the day, because they need to catch you. Same with our colleagues. So when a colleague comes to see me to look at a rash, I say, yes, my rule is, yeah, I'll come see the rash right now. I'm happy for that interruption. It's a decision I've made ahead of time that when my colleague asks for something, I will go. Unless it's like, hey, do you want to go camping this weekend? I'm like, not right now. Bye. It's not happening right now. But if it's, I've got a person in the room with a mole I need you to look at, I'm like, coming. and I follow them down the hallway. I look at them all and I go back to my room. I don't sit there and chat about camping this weekend at the same time. So I'm respecting my time, but I've got decisions about what I'm going to do with my colleagues. Same with my learners. So we've got third-year learners. We've got residents in our clinic right now. And so it depends. Sometimes I'll be like, okay, I want you to see this patient. I'm going to see the next 2, and then I'm coming back. So they're communicating with, how long do I expect you to be in there? When I come out, I'm going to finish my note, then I'll talk to you. So that they know we've had that conversation together. And again, it's a whole big topic, but hopefully that helps you kind of start to think about the behind the scenes, what's happening for you, what's happening for them, what do you need to do for these residents? Do you need to tick off every note? So when do you expect them to be done with their note? Have you actually told them the rules? So our learners know, you can talk to me once the note's done. I just set it up from the beginning.
I have a question.
Yes, hi.
Hi, I'm Yana, not Jean. I know we're registered as both. You guys
Yana.
over here
Hi.
hiding. I was wondering what you thought of. Someone gave me an idea before, when you like walking into a room, especially when it's a new consult, saying to the patient, you know, hi, and then kind of set down some boundaries like, hello, you know, your doctor referred you today for a pigmented lesion check.
Yes.
So which means I'm going to check your moles. I noticed in your intake form, you wanted to talk about rosacea. The focus today will be on the moles. We have 15 minutes, you know, just kind of laying down the expectations. And I've tried that a few times and it's been met with mixed results. Like, and I don't mean the part where like, this is what we're going to talk about. The part where I'm like, we have 15 minutes where people are kind of like, oh, when they start stressing.
Okay.
And
But
looking at this.
interestingly, you don't have 15 minutes.
No, I know, because that's a
And-
lot. That won't be done.
And they have no idea how long 15 minutes is. So you
Oh.
think a patient's going to understand what 15 minutes is?
Oh, I
Can
love
you even keep track of the time? So a lot of physicians
No.
cannot keep track of the time in the room. They've got no idea how long you were in there for. And why do you want to spend a whole 15 minutes on one mole? Like, come on. You're like, hey, we're seeing you for that pigmented lesion. Yep, looks good. Bye. Like, seriously, catch up with your day. You don't want to be in there for 15 minutes.
Okay, so what about, do you lay down any boundaries or sort of?
You have that inside you. You're like, hi, and we're setting up that agenda. Like you said, I'm going to see you for the pigmented lesions and the rosacea that you've mentioned. I would like you to reschedule that. Or I will see that too. Like, you're the boss, remember I said you get to decide what you're going to see in the room. But then when they say, and I want you to see, you get to say yes or no. Now, agenda setting, even though it makes it sound simple, it's not.
No,
Like-
because you spend like all this time explaining.
Not necessarily the explaining part, but expecting patients to come up with their list at the beginning and not have 15 other things they wanted to talk to you about as well. Like, that agenda setting piece, even though the literature says it helps.
You know what? We actually have an intake form. So the
Yeah.
patients fill it out. So I've got everything written down on what I'm expecting from my visit. And sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with what their family doctor referred them for. Completely different plans.
Exactly.
But it was more like I sort of, someone said you should set the patient expectations by the beginning of visit. Like, this is what's going to happen. Do you have any questions? But I don't know. I'm not finding
You
it.
can.
successful.
You get to decide the language that's going to work best for you and try a few things out. So you've already tried it one way, try it a couple more times that way, then try changing up the language a little bit. See what works for you and what you say to your patients. Okay. Because you may not find it like you didn't the first time. That's okay. Don't stop trying.
Don't be a quitter. Okay, got
Don't
it.
be a quitter. Just keep trying different things. So you're like, hey, my process is this. I say, I'm going to see you for the pigmented lesion that you were referred for, and we're going to reschedule you for the rosacea, and that's how it's going to work today.
Okay.
Like, if that's how you're going to run it, do it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Keep trying. Don't give up. Okay. What do you suggest for inboxes and triaging referrals outside of the patient clinical encounter? Okay. Love this question. So with triaging referrals, if you are in a specialized practice, how much of that can be taught to your staff? So staff can be trained to go through some of that triaging process for you, potentially, because that's going to save you a lot of time. And as you teach them, onboard them with this process, you're also going to do your quality assurance. So it's going to take, like any new stuff, it's that onboarding process is super important, and you check, and then you making sure you're getting the right quality of triages in front of you of, I don't know what this one is, I don't know what that one is. And then you're seeing correctly assigned triaging when you've done it that way. So there are specialists available who kind of teach specialty physicians how to do that process, but it's just part of teamwork, and it's part of working together as a team and deciding what is that physician work and what is not physician work, and what can be delegated to others if it's done correctly.
I think I was wondering,
Yes.
I guess about where do you structure that in a day if you say that it's supposed to be done, it's part of your day's work?
Yes, it is part of today's work.
Yeah. So is it, I guess is it a couple hours every day in the beginning, or I guess that's individual?
It is. So I would suggest start taking notice of how long the inbox takes you, and then when are you going to do this work? So you might know ahead of time, hey, I'm coming off a weekend of call, which is usually for me, there's 2 hours of inbox to do minimum. So I account for that when I'm planning out my day coming back from on call. If you're like, I notice every day 15 triage forms come in and I need to look at them every day. What time of day are you going to do them on your own? Are you going to have the secretary standing next to you as you do them? Like, what would work best and fastest for you to get those done? And what time of day works best for each of those parts of your inbox? So that's setting up that priority, and just try a few things, see what you need to do from a what's slowing you down perspective with your inboxes. Okay, marginalized folks who can't come in for 5 small appointments. Yeah, absolutely, Trish. So you get to decide by looking ahead at your schedule. Hey, Mrs. Jones is coming in, and she usually brings 3 kids because the car only works once a week. I'm going to expect when she comes, she'll bring the 3 kids with her. So I'm going to say, Mr. Jones, who's scheduled right after her, move him. I'll see him at 9 and I'll see her for an extra long appointment. So you're deciding, I want to see them for the long appointment, but can you now build that in for yourself so you're looking after you as well within that, if that's helpful for setting up your day. Okay. All right. I think we got to the end of the questions and the end of our time together, Karita. Oh, thank you. Yes, there's an evaluation coming. So much fun, more paperwork. Thanks, Jan. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your night. It was lovely to meet you. My pleasure. You want to stop the recording? You're good to